emphasize that the situation we witness today is on the level of global warming of some 0.74 degrees centigrade, or the equivalent of 380 parts per million. We just compiled here a couple of graphs from different scientific institutions to give you a sense about the variability from different scientific institutions when it comes to the amount of global warming. But you can clearly see that most of the experts agree that we will witness a strong increase in temperature over the next years, and this will automatically translate into human suffering, because as I said earlier, it's not only the warming itself, it's also that we are coming close to a couple of tipping points where actually the situation could accelerate and become out of control. Now, let's quickly look at the political process to fight global warming. We have the 1972 UN Conference on the Human Environment. We got 83 to 87, the Brundtland Commission, which actually coined the expression of sustainable development. And by 1992, global warming was already recognized to a point that the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change was passed, leading to a series of Conference of State Parties and additional protocols. Oops. Sorry, it's getting out of control. Leading to a series of conferences and additional protocols, such as the Kyoto Protocol. What we have now is the Bali roadmap, and you might recall that in the Conference of State Parties in Bali, the negotiations were close to not leading to any results, and in a very dramatic last session, when Ivo de Boer, the chairman, left the board in tears, at the very last second, the state parties could agree on a roadmap that basically says by the end of this year we will have a solution. Now, will we have a solution by the end of next year? Let's just look at what is at the table. What the United States committed so far would translate to a reduction of 3% by 2020. Experts would say that we need something between 35 to 45% if we are to make it by 2050. Canada, minus 3%. China just came out saying we are going to reduce 45% by 2020, and I was electrified to read that. But the little but about this is that China basically said 45% in function of per unit GDP. If you do the math, China already between 1919 and 2020 reduced CO2 footprint per unit of GDP by 45%. That's a normal thing for a developing economy. But if you put that in function of the economic growth, and if you would just assume that China continues to grow as before, that would actually translate in an increase of China's carbon emission by 300%. India is still unclear about the position. If they stay with the hard line that they presented so far, that would translate in something like 500% by 2020 on the baseline of 1990. The European Union said minus 20% or minus 30% under the condition that other countries are taking a strong stand, which is not very likely. Japan unilaterally came up with the best offer so far and said we are going to reduce by 1/4 in 2020. Now, let me talk about climate justice, and I want to make two very simple points. As I stated earlier, the world's poorest are suffering most from climate change today, but these are also the very same people who contributed least to the problem. And for future generations, there is no possibility to influence what their future is going to be, but yet they have to suffer the consequences. I'm sure you can't read that from your chairs, but the point I want to make is these are the global CO2 emissions, the red bar on the far left side. On the right-hand side, you see the accumulated emissions from the least developed countries. Or to put that simpler, this is a world map that shows you the CO2 emissions in function of the size of a country. So if a country is inflated larger than life, that means a very large CO2 footprint. And as you can see, Africa would not even be on the map if it wouldn't be for North Africa and South Africa as a big coal exporter. Let me put that together. The 50 least developed countries of this planet contribute together less than 1% of the global CO2 emissions. And yet these countries are bearing the consequences of climate change the hardest. We worked since 2008 with a group of experts on 8 key points on climate justice, where we just tried to put that in very simple terms what climate justice means. The first point, obviously, is the most important one. Take responsibility for the pollution you cause. And that means that obviously we have all to reduce our CO2 footprint tremendously, but also if we are not able to do so, we have to help those people who are suffering under our emissions to adapt and to build resilience. The second one, obviously, also is a very ethical principle that you have to act according to capability and capacity. And sometimes the capacity can be stronger than actually what you put out in emissions. But to translate it in very simple terms, everybody has to do the best that he or she can. Number 3, when we say share benefits and burden equitably, this becomes actually also with the REDD system, question of reforestation and who is actually going to benefit from carbon trading money. That needs to be shared also on the basis of contribution and sufferance. The fourth point, very importantly, respect and strengthen human rights, because we already see that some measures to fight climate change in itself falls injustice and human rights violations. And if you are interested in these points, I brought a couple of these brochures. You find them here on the left. If they are gone, it's also downloadable at our website. The fifth point is reduce risk to vulnerable populations to a minimum. And I would say this is particularly a point for the protection of indigenous people who showed with their lifestyle that you can live on this planet for tens of thousands of years without destroying it. And ironically, these are the very people who are amongst those who are suffering most. 7 is a point which obviously, when we have a global carbon trading system, there will be a lot of money in question, and to act in an accountable and transparent manner would be absolutely important to make sure that this is an instrument for equity and it's not sharpening social problems that are already existing. And the 8th point, as simple as it sounds, act now, because we really don't have any time to lose. These 8 points were discussed with a high-level panel in February in Pretoria, where we had Archbishop Tutu, Kofi Annan, Mary Robinson, Wangari Maathai, and Rajendra Pachauri, who made the strong case about these points. And let me conclude by this quote from Kofi Annan, who said, "There are no sides in the fight for climate justice." I think with all these dire picture, we should bear in mind that climate change might be and should be and must be the strongest uniting force that mankind has in these days. And I'm thrilled by the fact that the Parliament of World Religion invited us to speak about climate change and climate justice, because I believe that the religious communities can not only make a tremendous difference by speaking out for climate justice, but it might also be help for mutual understanding and working together with different groups in the religious societies. And with that, I would like to thank you.
Yeah.